Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're watching this. My name is Brayden. Thank you for tuning in to Grace Church. Today we're going to be in Psalm 46. If you would like to find your Bibles, open up the app, do whatever you need to do. It will be on the screen, but if you'd like to read along, we'll be in Psalm 46. And as you're turning there, I have, as I've gotten older, become a lot more interested in, I guess, what you could call modern world history, especially when it relates to American history post-World War II. And a story that is just so fascinating to me, especially because we didn't know that it happened, and we didn't know all of the details surrounding the situation until fairly recently. But the Cuban Missile Crisis was a very tenuous time in our nation's history. You probably heard some of the stories surrounding it. You probably have parents or grandparents, or maybe you yourself, lived through this part of our history. But there were 13 days where there was this standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union, where there was a concern of one of those parties using nuclear weapons against the other. Obviously, us being in the United States, we have the perspective that we were terrified, or at least preparing for the realistic outcome of what would happen if we were attacked with a nuclear weapon. There's a specific day during this event called Black Saturday, which refers to October 27th of 1962. And this is what people would say is the most dangerous day of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The day in which the world came closest to what the reality of nuclear war would actually look like. The story of Black Saturday is there was a submarine called a B-59 that was underneath the water in international waters, and this was a Russian submarine, and then there was a United States vessel that was floating over the top of the waters, and it recognized the submarine that was down below at the bottom of the ocean. Now, this submarine was equipped with nuclear warheads attached to their torpedoes. The United States ship, recognizing that there was a submarine, a Russian submarine down below, sent down what are called depth charges. And this is a warning sign. These are charges that get sent down below the water, and then they create a small explosion in the water, and it's meant to be a warning sign for a submarine to come up to the surface so they can figure out what it is and what is going on and why it's down there. Now, whenever this United States ship did this, because tensions were so high, this was the 12th day of almost 2 weeks of a stalemate where neither nation was sure if the other one was going to attack them with nuclear weapons. Because the tensions were so high, the commanding officers aboard this submarine thought that they were under attack. They perceived the depth charges as an actual attack against their ship, and they decided we need to launch our nuclear weapons. Essentially, their standing orders from the Soviet Union were, it doesn't matter what you have to do, you need to be the first ones to launch nuclear weapons if it comes to that. So this meeting is held, a very rapid and tenuous meeting was held between the three commanding officers aboard this submarine. Two of them voted yes, that we need to launch our nuclear warheads against the ship. One of them, though, recognized what was going on. A man whose name was Vasily Arkhipov, and he was the executive officer of this submarine. He refused to vote yes on pushing that button and launching the nuclear torpedoes. And people today realize that he probably prevented a nuclear war. The reason is because he remembered his training. And he recognized that depth charges are very different than an overt attack against your ship. And all they wanted to do was for us to come to the surface to see what was going on and why we were down there. See, what you saw in that situation was the human tendency to react, to control, and to panic when under pressure take over for two of those officers that voted to respond quickly and irrationally. And fortunately, we had one person who was calm and collected even under the pressure of that situation. I wonder, do you know somebody like that? Have you known somebody like that who just seems like they're always calm and collected? They're level-headed under pressure. They have almost a natural sense of peace, you could say, about them. And we tend to chalk that up to a personality trait. We tend to say, oh, that person's just like that. They have that natural ability to stay calm, to be relaxed, to think clearly, even whenever there's insurmountable pressure or stress applied to their lives. Well, today and in the passage that we're going to read, I want us to look at it differently. I don't want to see it as a personality trait. I want us to recognize that reality for our lives can be achieved, but it is dependent on our faith. It's not personality, it is faith. So let's read Psalm 46. We're going to read the entire chapter, verses 1 through 11, and we're going to see what this looks like according to God's word. Verse 1, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear through the earth, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Selah. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Come, behold the works of the Lord. Now he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. This is one of those passages that kind of just preaches itself, but I think it's going to be helpful for us to break it down and see how this comes about. Where is it moving us towards, and what is the message behind this part of God's word? The main question that I want to pose today is simply this: where is your faith? Psalm 46 takes us on a progression. It starts out in chaos. The scene opens with war, with storms, with battle, with uncertainty. But it ultimately moves towards confidence. What begins in chaos ends in confidence in God's ability and what that means for the life of those who trust and have faith in the ability of God. So the question this morning, where is your faith? And second to that, how do we go from chaos to confidence in our lives? I think it's going to be helpful to understand the historical context surrounding this part of Psalms. See, this psalm, Psalm 46, is a collection of psalms between 46 and 48 that celebrate God's protection of Jerusalem. They're often called the Psalms of Zion or the songs of God's kingship. Now, this particular part in history, most biblical scholars believe in the time and place and the events that are being referred to by this psalm are the deliverance of the nation of Jerusalem from Assyria. You can read about this in 2 Kings 18, 2 Chronicles 32, and Isaiah 36. But the key event that's taking place here is King Hezekiah was facing a terrible situation from the Assyrian Empire. As you may know, there were many kings throughout the nation of Israel and its history. Most of them were terrible. King Hezekiah stands out as this beacon of light, as a good king amongst just a cycle of terrible kings in the nation of Judah. And as he's facing down this imminent threat from the nation of Assyria, The king of Assyria, whose name is pronounced something like Sennacherib, estimated around the time of 701 BC, was getting his army ready to attack the city in Judea and the surrounding area of Jerusalem. He had already conquered many of the nations that surround the city. And this is a king who was well known to mock God and to threaten destruction specifically on the nations that saw God as their God. Hezekiah prayed in the temple. We see this in 2 Kings, and he asked God to defend his name and his people. We see that God answers his prayer by saying, I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. That very night that King Hezekiah prayed this prayer, it says that the angel of the Lord came and struck down the Assyrian Empire, which totaled 185,000 soldiers. And because of that, Jerusalem was saved. And it was nothing to do with human strength, with a military force that was being displayed, but it had everything to do with God's divine intervention. And because of the faithfulness of King Hezekiah, that nation was saved. But we start this psalm, Psalm 46, with chaos, when the world is shaking around them. We see this in verses 1 through 3 when it says that even though God is our refuge and our strength, the earth will still give way. Talks about catastrophe, earthquakes, mountains falling, waters roaring. See, these are metaphors for total instability. Everything that is meant to be solid, the ground, the ocean, mountains, all of it is collapsing. This is a picture of what it feels like when our lives are shaken. When the things that we put our trust in, when the things that are supposed to be constant and stable fail, when they falter. When the strongest relationships in our lives break apart. When the plans that we have fall. When our health is uncertain and unstable. But it quickly goes on to recognize the presence of God even in the midst of chaos. It says God is our refuge and our strength. It doesn't say that he has promised to keep all trouble and all strife away from us, but that he will be present with us in the midst of it. It says that God is a very present help. Literally mean a help that is found abundantly. Like you cannot go anywhere and not find the presence of God's help in your life. It's clear that God's nearness to us is not limited by the chaos and the crisis that we encounter in our lives. And then because of that, we see the response of faith. Therefore, we will not fear. And it's not because the chaos is gone. It's not because in an instant God came down and everything was solved or alleviated. It's because God is here. One of my favorite preachers, his name is Matt Chandler, and he often says that you could sum up the entirety of the story of the Bible in 3 words, or 1 word if you speak Hebrew. It's God is with us, Emmanuel. Faith doesn't mean that we will never encounter experiences in our life that cause us to be afraid. But it does mean that if we refuse to let that fear rule over our lives, we will experience what it is like to have God with us. See, when the world is shaking around us, when the world falls apart, it's our natural instinct to fight for control. To grab onto the things that we feel like we have an ability to control. But God's invitation here is to do the opposite. To recognize his power and his ability in the world, and because of that in our lives. And instead to relinquish our control over to him. And this is how we see it's possible to have confidence in God in the midst of chaos. Confidence, knowing that God is with us. And as we move to verses 4 through 7, we see that this is very clear. It says, There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. The Lord of hosts is with us. The single most comforting statement in this entire situation of chaos and uncertainty is the Lord of hosts is with us. And it says twice in this passage, the God of Jacob is our fortress. See, fortress is different than just simply a shelter. See, a fortress implies that you have shelter, but a fortress gives you the ability to withstand attack. A shelter might just be a place to guard you from the environment, from the surrounding situation that you're in. A fortress is a place that is meant to defend. A fortress is designed to keep the enemy away and even give the ability to fight back. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And we see here in these verses that the scene starts to shift. The roaring waters of verse 3 are replaced by a gentle, life-giving river. The chaos still hasn't ceased. The nations still raged. But in the midst of the raging of the nations, the city of God is calm. So you read passages like this and you're reminded that history will repeat itself. There's really nothing new that we experience today that they weren't experiencing then. Because you read things like this and you're like, man, this sounds like it could be describing our current environment that we're in right now. Everything that's supposed to be certain seems like it's crumbling down. The nations are raging. War-torn entire sections of the world. People falling under immense persecution, oppression, terrible, unfortunate circumstances that have nothing to do with the making that they have created in their own lives. It's all because there's another force out there that seems like it's more powerful than them that decided to exercise its will simply because they can. Simply because they have the ability to do that. They chose to oppress people, to kill, to pillage, to destroy. Goes to show you that thousands of years can take place, but it seems like the world doesn't change all that much. The question is, why in the midst of the nations raging can the city of God have peace and be calm? It's because they have faith that God is in the midst of them and he shall not be moved. This is the true source of stability for God's people. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. The Lord of hosts refers to the God who commands the armies of heaven. The God of angel armies. The one who says, yes, you might build up for yourselves mighty empires and have military force such that you can essentially do whatever you want to other people, which was definitely true for the nation of Assyria. But this psalm is there to remind God's people that God is the commander of the armies of heaven, which don't even come close to anything that worldly empires are capable of producing. The God of Jacob refers to a God who is willing to work and walk with imperfect and struggling people. This is a God who both reigns above the earth and yet remains inside of it, dwelling amongst his people. You know, it reminds me of when I was in high school, one of the things that would happen is, and maybe you had similar experiences, if there was a fight a situation that had to be resolved in physical violence, there would be a fight that was planned in a park that was near our school. And word would spread around the school, and everyone would know, there's going to be a fight happening today after school over at that park. And so several of the students would just walk over to this park. Apparently they didn't matter if they missed the bus or whatever, but they would just walk over to this park that was close to the school, and a couple of kids, would fight. And I remember one time my friend got wrapped up in a situation like this, and I say friend, he wasn't a good friend, but we spent a lot of time together, and it's because he lived a few houses down from me, and he was one of those kids that really wanted to seem like he was tough. He would act like he was a lot cooler than he was. And everybody could see right through it. Everybody knew, like, he's not that tough guy. His parents had a lot of money, and he didn't want to seem like that, the weak rich kid who just kind of hides behind daddy's money. He wanted to be tough. He wanted to be cool. And so because of that, he ended up getting in a lot of dumb situations with other people. And one time he picked a fight with the wrong guy, a guy who was on the football team, way bigger than he was. And of course, because of his pride and because he didn't want to be known as a weak kid, he agreed to this fight after school. And so we all walked over to this park, and I remember I actually went this time because it was my friend. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, like, I don't know what I'm going to do because I know that he's not going to win this fight. I know it's probably not going to last very long unless he just keeps trying, and is probably going to end up with him going to the hospital or something like that. But I'm his friend, and so I'm trying to figure out, like, what do I do? Do I help him? Do I just kind of stand on the side and say, you got this, like, don't worry, when I know he's going to lose? I didn't really know. And so I remember they go and they fight, and fortunately it was over very quickly, and the guy knocked him on his back, and he got the breath knocked out of him, and he decided not to fight back. And it was over very quickly. And I realized that who is with you in a fight makes a big difference in the outcome of the fight. Take, for example, if you were going to get in a fight, which I definitely don't recommend, but for whatever reason you end up getting in a fight, and the only person that you can find to come with you is like your little nephew. And I think you would be like, well, I'm glad you're here. It's somewhat comforting that somebody's with me, but I'm not confident in your ability to help me in this fight. Say instead you have a friend who's an ex-Navy SEAL, and he decides that he's going to go with you on that fight. He's got 157 ways that he could kill a person using only a piece of string and a thumbtack. That would instill a lot more confidence in you as you go and approach this person that you're going to fight. And this is exactly what it is like to be the nation of Israel, or to be a follower of God at the time and place that they were in. This is what it is like to have faith in our God, because there is one who is coming with us. You can say, my God has a special set of skills. There is one who is coming with you, who has the ability to win the fight, and it doesn't matter who decides they're going to fight against you. This is what it is like to have certainty in God's ability. There's a promise included in this psalm where it says, I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. This is the voice of a victorious king. See, the end of the chaos is not what brings us faith. And our faith is not placed in the chaos ending, but instead it is God being glorified. When you know that he will be exalted, you can stop fighting your battles on your own. It is promised who will win the battle. And if our faith is placed in that promise, our perspective can completely change, even in the midst of chaos in our lives. This section of verses closes with the refrain, the Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress. Repeated these words again. See, now they're spoken in a different light because it's on the other side of the stillness. We started in chaos, but now we stand in the confidence because we have seen what God does in our lives. We can face many things that will shake us, but because our refuge, our fortress, does not shake, we can have confidence in him. So where does confidence in God come from? Where does chaos turn into confidence? I think we see it at the end of this passage. It comes in the stillness. Confidence in God is achieved when we are still. It says in verses 8 through 11, come behold the works of the Lord. He makes wars cease. And there in verse 10, be still and know that I am God. These words, be still, can also be translated as stop. stop striving. Rapha means to let go, to relax, to be calm. God is telling his people, you do not have to hold this together because I already do. See, stillness is not weakness. Stillness is not inaction. Stillness is an act of worship. The call here is to know that I am God. And this is the heart of confidence in God. True peace comes from not knowing what the plan or the outcome is, but instead knowing the person who rules over it all. The world will say, be strong and take control. Our culture right now knows nothing of stillness and of peace. It knows nothing but striving and control and stress and anxiety. But God says, in the midst of that, in the midst of a culture that is gravitating towards chaos all the time, be still and trust in my control. See, there is a quiet secret of stillness that doesn't mean that it's the absence of motion, but it means the presence of peace in our lives. This is what happens when we surrender the illusion that we think we have over the control of our lives and instead rest in the reality of God's presence. This is what it is to have true faith in God. Earlier this year, I got to go visit my best friend who lives in upstate New York. And one of the things you do when you live in upstate New York is you go ice fishing. You know, people up there, they ice fish. You know, I'm born and raised in New Mexico. I barely even know the concept of ice fishing. I barely even know what ice is at all. I've never seen a frozen lake, that's for sure. I've barely even seen frozen water sitting outside. But I go to New York, and he plans this trip where we're going to go ice fishing. And as we're driving to the lake in upstate New York that we're going to go to, he tells me this story of later last year, at the start of the ice fishing season, he goes with some buddies from work up to the same lake that we're going to. And he said that they kind of spread out. You know, you set up your shanties, you use the auger, you dig the hole, you sit there and freeze to death while you hope that a fish just swims by and bites on your lure. And they were spread out looking for the places that they wanted to go, but the lake had been covered in about 10 inches of snow. And that can lead to a bit of a dangerous situation because you can't really see the ice. The ice is just covered in a layer of snow. And the thing that the snow does is it creates insulation between the coldness of the air and the ice below it. And typically that's not going to be a problem. But on the specific day that they went out, it was absolutely a problem because one of the guys who went out wandered off into a thin part of the ice and didn't realize it, and it began to crack. And all of them started to hear the cracking on the place that he was in, and this guy started to sprint backwards, but he couldn't outrun it, and he fell through the ice. And he said it was one of the most panicked situations that he's ever seen in his life, because this guy falls through, and he had the presence of mind to grab onto the ledge that was behind him so that he didn't just get swept underneath the surface of the ice, but he couldn't pull himself out. The current underneath was too strong. So they rush over to him, get as close as possible, and fortunately they have necessary equipment. They throw the rope over to him, and it takes a couple of tries, but finally they get it to where he can reach it, and it takes all 5 of them to pull him out and resist the current. So he tells me that story as we're driving to the same exact lake that we're about to go ice fishing on, and we get there and we park and we load up his little sled thing, and we're about to walk onto the ice. And I remember staring at the threshold between land and death and thinking to myself, I don't know if I'm very confident right now in taking this first step onto a frozen body of water that's adamant on killing me. And it was a struggle mentally to get past that. But then I walked onto the ice, and I realized how solid it feels when there's 12 inches of frozen ice on top of a river, and it feels like you're walking on land. And we spent the whole day ice fishing. We caught very few things. But it was an interesting experience for me because I realized that the thickness of the ice completely changes the outcome of your ice fishing experience. See, this is like faith in our lives. It is putting our trust in something that is out of our control. See, walking out on thin ice and trusting that it will hold you is what it is like to put our faith in worldly things. It's what it's like to put our faith in financial security, in our jobs, our occupations. It's what it's like to put our faith in a relationship, in our health, even in ourselves, in our own ability. It doesn't matter how bad you want those things to be true. It doesn't matter how much you believe that those things will be the thing that sustains your life. Something can happen unexpectedly that's completely out of your control and completely ruin those plans that you had in an instant. None of us are immune from chaos ensuing in our lives. But when we put our faith in God, it's like trusting on the thickest part of the ice in the best part of the season to go ice fishing, because it doesn't matter what you could drive a truck onto that lake at that point. It will not fall through. See, when we are still and when we know who is our God and where our help comes from, we learn that God's presence is not a place that we run to. It's a person who is always with us. So how do we move from chaos to confidence? It's by being still. It's in the stillness. Faith is not produced when the storm is gone in our life, but it begins when God is exalted. The peace of Psalm 46 is not found in what changes around you, but instead who stays constant with you. The answer is, this picture of stillness does not mean that we simply do nothing. We should be diligent in our lives in times of chaos and uncertainty. But there is a way in which we can be diligent and still fully trust in the faithfulness of God. If you're listening to this and you are unemployed, fill out the job applications. Call the managers. Do what you need to do in order to be diligent in resolving that situation. But do all that and then rest in God's faithfulness. If your marriage is just in the trash and everything seems like it's falling apart in your relationship, learn to give them grace. Go to counseling. Take practical steps to improve that, but then put it in God's hands and be still in His faithfulness. If you're battling an addiction, put the necessary work in. Go to rehab. Follow the necessary steps, but then rest in God's faithfulness. If your health is declining, go on a diet. Exercise. Go to the gym. But then rest in God's faithfulness. In Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41, when Jesus was with the disciples in the boat and they went out onto the river, and then a terrible storm came through, and Jesus stands up and He calms the storm by saying, "Peace, be still." He wasn't simply controlling the weather. He was revealing Himself to be the same God that we see in Psalm 46. The same Jesus who spoke stillness to the sea and the chaos in the disciples' lives still seeks to speak stillness into our soul. So when was the last time that you were truly still before God? When was the last time that you took 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, and just put all distractions aside? Distance yourself from the things that are constantly wanting to vie for our attention, and instead we're just still before God. There's a beautiful thing that happens whenever we regularly practice stillness before God. The areas of our life that are just constantly enveloped in chaos are put into perspective that the God of angel armies is on our side. Therefore, what chaos could cause anxiety in our lives? The word for you today out of Psalm 46 is simple. Be still and know that I am God. Let the chaos in your life drive you to stillness, and let that stillness lead you to the confidence that only comes in knowing God is in control. God, I pray for just those who are in chaos. I pray for those who feel that their life has a giant question mark placed at the end of it. God, I pray that you would remind us that you are the God of hosts, that you command the angel armies. And so even when insurmountable chaos and uncertainty and anxiety and stress seems to be lurking at the door of our lives, it doesn't matter what the outcome is, because you are with us in the storm. So God, just remind us where our help comes from. Show us the areas of our life that we have yet to put our faith in you. And God, would we be people who trust in your plan, even though we don't know the answers? God, help us to know what this looks like for us. I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, thank you for tuning in. Hope to see you back next week. You guys take care.